If you would like to support the continuation of this series, please consider heading over to patreon.com/Lowart. Every donation counts, and they go a long way in helping me to continue this series. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy this video. So here we are, part 13. The last section where I'll be able to go through this stuff in chronological order. After this, things are going to get a bit more complicated, but for now, let's wrap this up by talking about Teacher. In 2003, the introduction of Izumi is a lot different than in Mangahood. After all, in 2003, Ed and Elle are actively avoiding her, while in Mangahood they specifically go to see her. While this may immediately seem to make Ed and Elle more active protagonists in Mangahood and more reactive ones in 2003, that isn't quite the case. After all, their primary goal isn't just to avoid her in 2003, they also want to catch up with Scar. So they have their own goal. The path to getting to that goal is just obstructed by Izumi hunting them down. However, other than these circumstances, Izumi acts in a fairly similar manner in all three versions. She's aggressive, violent, impatient, and overall just not a very nice person. In fact, she's abusive to the boys. Each version has a bit of a different way of dealing with this, but none of them ever seek to question this morally. I believe that the idea with her physical violence was to communicate that she is harsh and strong-willed, but I also think that this aspect of her character was taken a bit far, considering that her actions are never seriously questioned in any series. Regardless of that though, let's start with the manga's take on these events, and then compare and contrast the other two versions to it. This section of the manga begins with a flashback to Ed's childhood, where we see his focus on his father, though he is unwilling to even call him father. It's a brief moment, but it shows us quite a bit about Ed's relationship with him. We don't see his face. There is a distance between them. This section is also relevant because Ed and Elle are going to learn that they'll probably have to encounter their father again if they want to learn more about the Philosopher's Stone. His inclusion also establishes that this section is going to focus on the past. Then we're introduced to Izumi, with her fundamental character trait being, of course, her aggressiveness. This is the first time we see what will be a running gag throughout the series, and one that I'm not very fond of. The fact that Izumi is coughing up blood is, well, pretty serious, and it's because of something very serious that happened, so I've never really understood why this is played off as comedic more often than not. This is another one of those cases where I really don't think comedic tone suits the story best. Either way though, her illness gives us a chance to see the dynamics of her relationship with her husband, which I really enjoy. The designs here are meant to be comedically different, in that this big bear of a man is really a sweetheart and this relatively small woman is an absolute savage. His care for her is genuine even if it is given a bit of a comedic spin, and it's very endearing, and helps get the audience to care about Izumi on some level. Then we get some hints that Izumi's story somehow involves her inability to give birth, and then Ed does something kind of stupid. He just voluntarily transmutes in front of Izumi by clapping his hands together. Now, Brotherhood and 2003 both changed this, and while I don't think it's a huge deal by any means, I think that having Ed in a situation where he uses it based off of instinct or necessity is better. At least if the writers want to continue to highlight his intelligence. Of course, it's not inherently better to do that. It's fine if he has moments of silliness. I just prefer what Brotherhood in 2003 did. The manga then goes on to show us a bit about Izumi's philosophy and how she views alchemy. Although this moment is brief, it's included in all three versions of the story, and for good reason. An important idea to touch on is that what's lost is lost, and that alchemy cannot always fix that, and that it should not be used in that manner anyway. In addition, it shows that alchemy just isn't necessary to fix certain problems, which is especially important in Mangahood considering how the story is going to end. The manga in 2003 both capitalize on this by showing something that can be fixed, and then something that can't be fixed. And now we hit a major point of difference in the manga, Brotherhood in 2003. Because this is where we finally see what happened to the brothers in their past. Up until now, we've only just heard brief details. Meanwhile, in Brotherhood in 2003, we've already seen most of it. In a previous section of this video series, I already discussed why this change worked well in 2003 and didn't really work in Brotherhood. And I also discussed why it worked in the manga to have this occur so late into the story. My basic point there was that Ed is constructed as a pretty typical wish fulfillment type character, or at least a character that most younger people reading the manga would have been able to look up to. So showing too much of their past would have highlighted their weakness instead of their strengths, and would have undermined the Nina incident, which to a certain degree is what happened in Brotherhood. Either way, in the manga, we now see how connected to their mother alchemy has always been. They learned it for her, used it to make gifts for her, and finally used it to try and bring her back to life. The manga flies through this section, hardly giving their mother any time to establish herself as a character. This is why, outside of looking at this in terms of narrative structure, I prefer the way 2003 tackled this. Getting to see more of their mother means that we connect with them in a deeper way and that we understand their motivations even more. Of course, having it be that they want to bring their mother back to life makes it automatically relatable to a lot of people. But still, I think Brotherhood in the manga could have done a better job of giving her time to establish herself, and not to just exist as a sort of archetype or to just fulfill a role. I do, however, really appreciate how the manga hones in on Ed and Al's dynamic leading up to this mistake. Ed is incredibly stubborn about it, while Al clearly doesn't think it's a good idea. Ed constantly rejects reality as well as negative hypotheticals, or really just hypotheticals that he generally doesn't like. Al, on the other hand, is a lot more realistic and concerned. Here we see how one of Ed's most major character traits, his pride, led to such a terrible decision. Then, of course, they find Azumi and use her as a means to grow more proficient at alchemy. We see some of Azumi's tenderness and kindness and how she does, at least to a certain degree, care about the boys, but their relationship is always marred by this violence and aggressiveness. Now, before we move on to Ed and Al's time on the island, let's talk about how 2003 and Brotherhood have handled things up to this point. Talking about how 2003 portrays this is really quick because it's very similar to what the manga does. In fact, I don't have any major differences to discuss, other than that some additional emphasis is placed on Winry here by having her recall some of the brothers' past. There's also some stuff with Mustang, but we'll get into that in a future video. I guess there's also this scene with Azumi beating the shit out of Ed and Al, which is far more brutal than what's in the manga and Brotherhood. All of the real major differences, though, are in terms of presentation, which, as usual with 2003, is great. Brotherhood, meanwhile, just goes through this material faster, having what occurs over 2 episodes in 2003 occur in 1. This means that we don't see as much of Azumi now, which I think is a poor decision considering how integral she is to the climax of the plot. This also means that we don't get to see as much of her philosophy about alchemy, which distances us from her emotionally. So now let's talk about the one for all section, where the boys are left on this island together to fend for themselves. There's one difference in particular that changes our understanding of Azumi's character across versions, and that is the inclusion or exclusion of this guy. In the manga in 2003, this dude stays behind on the island with the boys, and that's pretty important. First, by cutting this guy out in Brotherhood, Azumi seems far less responsible. Sure, he does attack the boys, but the implication here is that he wouldn't kill them. He's also there to make sure that they don't die in general, actually. Basically, Azumi left him there to both make the training more challenging and to ensure that the boys wouldn't just die. Second, having him there adds an additional layer to the idea of one for all, and the idea that the boys need to be able to and willing to fight and kill others to survive. In Brotherhood, this is only shown to extend to other species. In the manga in 2003, this is also applicable to humans. After all, he only stops attacking the boys when Ed finally picks up a knife and gets ready to fight. This lesson is all about testing their resolve as much as possible and making sure that the boys are truly committed to learning alchemy. This means that the brothers will need to be willing to fight other humans to survive. And it's a lesson that is particularly important to have in 2003, as Ed is going to face more complex moral decisions there than he ever will in the manga or Brotherhood. Other than that, though, I just want to take a moment to appreciate the way that 2003 goes through these events, cutting back and forth from past to present. The shots used to cut back and forth really give us a sense that Ed and Al are reliving parts of their past, and beyond that, some of them display a wonderful level of creativity. This also manages to connect Wrath, a homunculi, with Ed and Al's lesson that they need to be willing to fight others for their own sake. Similarly, it connects Wrath with Azumi, as this man is also connected to Azumi. As it often does, 2003 is doing a good job of using different characters to reflect each other and reveal more about them. Reflecting back to the past also gives us the sense that this is a new start for the boys, and considering that this is where the story diverges in particularly extreme ways, giving the audience that feeling is a good idea. Speaking of diverging, I can't really keep comparing these versions in chronological order now. Things just get too different from here on out. Which is why I've decided I'm going to continue this series with something that many of you have been requesting for a long time, or at least that you were hoping I would get to. A comparison of all the homunculi in each version. So let's do that, starting with Wrath. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to all of the people who donated to make this video possible on Patreon. I really, really appreciate it, and the support goes a long way. Second, just in general, thank you for watching this video and for the continual support on this series. I'm definitely looking forward to the homunculi analyses. It's something I wanted to do since I started this series, and I will be doing my best on those and working as hard as I can. Thank you very much, and I hope that you have a great day. Bye bye.